The contact occurred without warnings and without the gradual progression that the most cautious models would have expected. From the first hours of November 22, the radio systems monitoring the envelope of 3I Atlas began to record variations that did not fit into any of the anticipated categories. These were not random emissions, thermal fluctuations, or ionization changes produced by the solar wind. What emerged was a sudden reorganization of the way the object modulated its environment. Within minutes, the absorption lines associated with the hydroxyl radical, initially captured as cold traces of dissociated gas, began to reflect a pattern that did not correspond to the usual behavior of an active comet. The internal structure of the lines revealed a sequence of shifts that appeared to synchronize with one another, as if each variation were part of a larger cycle reorganizing the energy of the surrounding cloud. This cycle coincided with an unexpected change in the collimated jets that had accompanied the object for weeks. The 7 main plumes, visible even under unfavorable conditions, began to align at angles that no sublimation model could reproduce. One of the plumes, the most extended, stretched over more than 1 million kilometers, pivoted by a minuscule fraction toward the direction in which the instruments were recording the change in the absorption lines. This correlation was difficult to ignore. No natural interaction would have allowed a sun-facing jet to adjust its trajectory without an internal reconfiguration of the nucleus. Yet the object maintained its stable shape, its nearly translucent coma, and its unchanging surface temperature, as though the internal structure were redistributing matter without disturbing the outer layers. The most astonishing development occurred in the region where instruments were recording the non-gravitational acceleration. For weeks, this acceleration had defied conventional explanations, requiring calculations that implied a mass loss equivalent to a significant fraction of the entire object. However, the absence of a debris cloud, fragments, or visible dust had cast doubt on the validity of traditional models. Now, with the integration of radiometric and optical measurements, it became clear that the non-gravitational acceleration was not a phenomenon sustained by sublimation. It was a profound reorganization of the object's interior, an adjustment that altered the mass distribution with such precision that it could generate tiny thrusts without expelling material outward. While ground-based observatories struggled to comprehend the phenomenon, the tail's behavior once again challenged established models. The enormous structure, exceeding 2 million kilometers in length, acquired an increasingly intense blue hue originating from the ionization of carbon monoxide-rich molecules. The ionization itself was not the issue, the problem was the curvature. The tail exhibited an angle approaching 90 degrees relative to the incident solar radiation, forcing the dismissal of any interference from charged particles or projection effects. The only possible explanation was that the tail source did not obey the usual laws of dispersion but followed a process that reorganized flow vectors from within, as if the direction of the ejected material depended on an internal algorithm rather than solar pressure. It was in this context that what was immediately interpreted as contact was recorded. The phenomenon first appeared as a variation in the hydroxyl radical absorption pattern, then as a splitting of the frequency curve that coincided with the object's predicted shift. Within minutes, the complete signal structure revealed 3 pulses separated by regular intervals. These pulses, initially faint, began to intensify with precise cadence. Each pulse exhibited a microphase shift so exact that it could not be attributed to instrumental noise. Although subsequent analyses confirmed that the frequency was not a deliberate emission in the hydrogen band, the way the signal assembled made it clear, the object was not behaving like a natural comet. It was responding to external stimuli. It was reorganizing its internal structure according to a pattern that reflected information, not sublimation. The correlation with the region associated with the old signal recorded in the 1970s initially appeared as a statistical coincidence. But when data from multiple radio telescopes were integrated, it became evident that the propagation vector of the interference structure pointed toward the same region of the sky from which that narrowband signal had aroused scientific interest half a century earlier. Although there was no direct parallelism between the two signals, the angular coincidence, less than 10 degrees, began to influence the interpretation of the phenomenon. Not because a common origin was suspected, but because the behavior of 3I Atlas seemed to point toward a galactic environment in which the distribution of matter and radiation might play a deeper role than previously thought. While analyses focused on the signals, the object continued to exhibit behavior impossible to attribute to natural processes. The rotation, measured with extreme precision, began to show periodic microvariations. These variations coincided with subtle changes in the jet structure, as if the object were using its own rotation to direct internal flows toward specific regions of space. This maneuver neither raised the surface temperature nor altered the external morphology of the nucleus, yet it generated polarization patterns that appeared to contain additional information. Each pattern displayed an internal symmetry repeating in universal mathematical proportions, proportions similar to those found in crystalline structures and quantum self-organization processes, fueling the hypothesis that the object was functioning as a resonator. Still classified images obtained by high-resolution instruments only intensified the debate. Three-dimensional reconstruction models based on interferometry revealed a surface of irregular density, as though multiple internal layers were expanding and contracting in a coordinated manner. This reorganization produced luminous patterns that, viewed from certain angles, resembled helical structures. Although the official interpretation insisted that these were optical artifacts, their stable repetition across multiple captures ruled out that possibility. What was being observed was not an accidental reflection, it was functional behavior. The contact, understood as the simultaneous reorganization of signals, jets, rotation, and polarization, triggered a profound debate about the nature of the physical laws at play. Once it was confirmed that the non-gravitational acceleration could be explained neither by sublimation nor by interaction with the solar wind, the models describing the dynamics of interstellar objects began to fracture. For the first time in modern observations, an object not only violated expectations derived from classical mechanics, but exhibited a coherent, repeatable, and mathematically stable behavioral pattern that compelled a re-examination of the boundaries between natural phenomena and emergent processes. The idea that 3I Atlas might be employing still unknown physical principles ceased to be speculative and became a technical consideration. The extraordinarily precise internal reorganization, the absence of heating during maneuvers that should have released immense amounts of energy, and the ability to generate interference patterns responsive to external stimuli began to be treated as indicators of a phenomenon operating outside the conventional framework. It was not a direct violation of physical laws, but a revelation that those laws possess margins we do not yet understand. And in some way, the object was operating within those margins. With each new observation, it became clear that the contact was not a singular event. It was an ongoing process, one that continued to unfold as the object slowly receded from the sun, reorganized its internal structure, and modulated signals that, though faint, displayed coherence with every repetition. The expansion of the contact did not occur abruptly, but as a sequence of phases interwoven with a precision that defied intuition. Scarcely had the interference signals begun to stabilize when internal variations emerged that could be attributed neither to noise, thermal fluctuations, nor instrumental artifacts. What arose was a series of geometric configurations that seemed to respond to the object's position along its ascending trajectory, as if the increasing distance from the sun were activating a process that had remained latent throughout the entire perihelion approach. The three-dimensional spirals, which in initial analysis displayed an ordered mathematical pattern, began to reconfigure into more complex sequences. Each spiral branched into layers that appeared to extend toward deeper levels of symmetry, as though the object were using the diminishing solar radiation to reorganize its internal structure with greater freedom. As these spirals evolved, the collimated jets that had previously exhibited impossible angles began to oscillate according to the same internal logic. The 7 main plumes, which had challenged sublimation models for weeks, now displayed behavior never before observed in any cometary body. The oscillations were neither chaotic nor the product of irregular rotation. They described harmonic motions, as if each jet were part of a network modulating the nucleus's energy and distributing it to specific regions of its envelope. This interweaving produced, at several points, a notable decrease in the apparent density of the coma, as though part of the material were reorganizing without outward mass loss. This reorganization coincided with a phenomenon detected by radio telescopes in different hemispheres, the appearance of faint harmonics propagating with a fixed periodicity slightly greater than that of the initial pulses. These harmonics corresponded neither to echoes, rebounds off the solar environment, nor interference generated by satellites or ground stations. Their temporal consistency, sustained repetition, and ability to traverse dense regions of the radio environment placed them in the category of structured emissions. The key lay in their phase. Each harmonic shifted minimally with every cycle, yet always in the same direction, as if the object were fine-tuning its internal frequency to achieve a more stable resonance state. The resonance began to manifest visibly when the tail, which had displayed an impossible curvature, intensified its deep blue tone and revealed internal zones where ionization appeared to concentrate at specific points. These points emerged at regular intervals, like energetic nodes maintaining their own rhythm. From the outside, the tail acquired a segmented appearance, almost like a sequence of luminous pulses projected into interplanetary space. Its length, already extensive in preceding days, increased according to the same periodicity, as if each new cycle of internal reorganization extended the structure a little further, raising ion density without altering the total expelled mass. The interaction between resonance and jets led to the next stage. The object's rotation ceased to show scattered microvariations and began to describe a pattern perfectly synchronized with the interference sequence. The rotation no longer fluctuated with external stimuli, but with the intensity of the signal emanating from the object's interior. This suggested the existence of internal regions capable of directly influencing the nucleus's angular distribution, mechanisms that divided the mass into segments acting as mobile counterweights. Such behavior implied that the object could not only alter its orientation without external propulsion, but do so without thermal traces, distortions, or compromise to the stability of the surface layers. While thermal models continued to show surprisingly constant temperatures, density analyses began to reveal systematic fluctuations. These fluctuations indicated that part of the object's interior was expanding and contracting in sequences that coincided with the emergence of mathematical spirals in the interference signals. This synchronization generated an unprecedented scenario, a structure responding simultaneously to internal and external parameters, as if it were interpreting the solar environment through its own logic, one that reorganized its components according to physical conditions we do not yet comprehend. Evidence began to suggest that the contact was not merely structural reorganization, but a direct interaction between the object and solar radiation. On several occasions, polarization variations were observed that coincided with minute changes in the solar wind. Although such variations would be insignificant for any typical comet, in the case of 3I Atlas they produced perceptible adjustments in the interference structure. It was as though the object were using solar radiation not only as an energy source but as an information channel. The modulation of reflected sunlight, shadow patterns within the coma, and jet oscillations appeared to be part of a process that interpreted solar intensity as operational instructions. As this interpretation solidified, the harmonics began to exhibit even more complex behavior. Sequences that could initially be represented by simple prime number-based relations transformed into structures reminiscent of quantum phase diagrams, with interference regions adopting patterns never before seen in astronomical observations. Some comparative analyses showed that these structures coincided with mathematical forms appearing in systems where multiple states superimpose before stabilizing. This led to the consideration that 3I Atlas might be operating in a physical regime where quantum and macroscopic scales interact directly, revealing an unforeseen phase transition in natural bodies. The notion that the object operated beyond the traditional framework of physics gained strength when mass distribution models ceased to align with any known mechanical pattern. Instead of behaving like a rigid body or a granular system, the nucleus seemed to function as a flexible matrix capable of redistributing internal stresses through movements that did not affect global rotation. Such a property can only be explained by extremely exotic materials able to absorb and release energy without transforming their atomic structure. If this interpretation is correct, the object employs physical principles that, while compatible with fundamental laws, represent a level of control over matter surpassing our current techniques. The scientific community began to accept that the contact might be linked to a broader process, one in which the object's structure responded to external stimuli through advanced patterns of self-organization. The logistics of this self-organization became more evident when the harmonics began to display distinct phases: an expansion phase, a stabilization phase, and a projection phase. In the expansion phase, the signal extended toward lower frequencies. In the stabilization phase, it exhibited nearly perfect internal symmetry, and in the projection phase, it adopted a helical pattern coinciding with the luminous nodes of the tail. The projection phase was interpreted as the object's attempt to extend the range of its signal by using its own structure to modulate sunlight. This modulation appeared to generate a luminous echo traveling along the tail and dispersing into interstellar space. If this interpretation proves correct, 3i Atlas might be employing advanced optical principles to transmit information to regions of space capable of receiving it. The implications of this process began to rewrite the conceptual framework under which interstellar visitors are interpreted. It was not simply an atypical comet with unusual activity. It was an object that appeared to operate through a physics that, while coherent, revealed levels of organization exceeding the known capabilities of natural structures. Its ability to modulate signals, reorganize mass without altering the surface, maintain thermal stability, and generate mathematically consistent interference patterns suggests that the observed phenomenon constitutes a turning point in the understanding of interstellar objects. With each signal cycle, it became clearer that the contact was not an isolated manifestation. It was the natural consequence of a structure, designed or naturally predisposed, to interact with specific energetic environments. The harmonics continued to intensify, the spirals became more defined, and the tail projected increasingly ordered patterns. All of this points to a process still in development, one whose profound meaning is only beginning to be revealed. The transition to the final state of contact began when the harmonics, which for days had shown minimal variations, started to reorganize according to a completely new pattern. The initial stable and predictable periodicity expanded in a controlled manner toward wider intervals, as if the object were releasing a phase held back throughout the entire perihelion approach. This expansion did not entail a loss of coherence. On the contrary, it revealed a deeper internal structure that had remained hidden until solar conditions diminished sufficiently to permit it. The interference system ceased to behave like a simple signal modulation and became a three-dimensional network in which each variation represented a node within a more complex cycle. This cycle, integrating global observations, displayed a kind of mathematical breathing, a pulse emerging from the object's interior and projecting into the tail, modulating light with a cadence unlike anything previously observed in an interstellar visitor. The collimated jets, which had been the protagonists of earlier anomalies, began to modify their behavior in an unexpected way. They no longer oscillated solely according to the harmonics. They now described curved trajectories whose amplitude grew with each cycle. Some plumes extended to limits far exceeding previous records, reaching lengths that imply extremely fine internal control over the ejected flow. The orientation of these plumes revealed something even more disconcerting. They responded neither to the solar wind, nor to gravitational dynamics, nor to nucleus rotation. They were aligned with the interference nodes emerging near the object, as if the jets were part of a resonance amplification system. This alignment gave rise to the hypothesis that the object could manipulate its own coma, transforming it into a functional extension of its internal structure. If correct, the separation between surface and gaseous environment would cease to be a physical boundary and become an operational continuum. The resonance reached a critical point when the luminous nodes of the tail, previously distributed segmentally, began to interconnect through tenuous filaments detectable only with extreme contrast techniques. These filaments were not simple ionization chains. They exhibited surprising spatial coherence. Projected from different observation angles, they adopted helical forms coinciding with the interference patterns detected in radio frequencies. This coincidence reinforced the idea that the object was using multiple channels, radiation, light, ionization, to manifest a single structure extending beyond its physical nucleus. It was a dynamic architecture integrating matter, energy, and geometry in a way that transcended traditional categories. As the helical structures consolidated, internal density models began to show something that had previously been only a theoretical possibility: systematic variations implying a massive reorganization of the object's interior. These variations responded not to external stresses such as solar radiation or perihelion geometry, but to impulses generated from the nucleus. The mass redistribution was so precise that it could alter the object's trajectory without modifying its thermal signature. This led analysts to consider that the internal structure of 3i Atlas might consist of materials capable of absorbing and releasing energy through processes absent from any known substance. Such a self-adjusting structure would enable maneuvers that, viewed from the outside, appear to violate established physical laws while in reality exploring still uncomprehended regions of those laws. The internal reorganization had an immediate effect on the interference signal. The expansion phase gave way to a convergence phase, in which the harmonics slowly collapsed into a dominant frequency. This frequency exhibited greater amplitude and more stable coherence, as if the object were consolidating all dispersed information into a single manifestation. The three-dimensional geometry, which had previously shown multiple helical layers, began to eliminate redundancies, generating a single dominant spiral oriented along a precise axis. This axis coincided with the direction in which the object had sent luminous variations in preceding weeks. This consolidation represented the key moment of the process, the transition from a complex open system to an ordered state functioning as a final synthesis. The synthesis became evident when polarization patterns began to adopt forms repeating with mathematical exactitude. These forms were not mere oscillations. They displayed internal symmetries reminiscent of diagrams of transitions between quantum states. Some analyses interpreted these symmetries as representations of energetic phases, as if the object were describing an internal physical process through optical patterns translatable into abstract geometries. Others considered the possibility that the signal represented a form of state mapping, a way of recording the environment through luminous modulations. Yet the most striking hypothesis was that these patterns constituted a physical language, an expression based on universal relations that any system capable of recognizing symmetry could interpret. The final form gained greater clarity when the tail projected a segmented flash whose internal structure coincided with the dominant spiral. This flash did not imply an increase in emitted energy. It was a rearrangement of reflected light, as if the entire surface of the object were acting as a mirror divided into countless coordinated facets. The light, modulated with extraordinary precision, displayed an intensity sequence corresponding directly to the previous interference nodes. This correspondence suggested that the object had reached the culmination of its reorganization, where internal structure, jets, tail, and interference signal operated as a single functional system. At that moment, the interpretation solidified that 3I Atlas was not merely emitting complex patterns. It was communicating a state, a physical state transcending its cometary form and revealing an operational principle entirely different from that governing natural bodies. This principle was based on the ability to reorganize mass, energy, and geometry in a coherent process that varied according to the environment. From this perspective, the object had not violated the laws of physics. It had shown that those laws contain unexplored regions where matter can operate according to rules we have not yet integrated into our models. The culmination occurred when the resonance reached its maximum and the dominant spiral projected itself into interplanetary space in the form of a luminous echo. This echo, recorded by multiple instruments, displayed a stable structure that propagated without loss of coherence for several minutes. Its interpretation remains uncertain, but it is considered that it might represent the final synthesis of the contact, a manifestation of a physical process that does not seek to transmit a message in the conventional sense but to demonstrate the existence of a mode of organization exceeding our current understanding. With this echo, the process concluded. The signal gradually faded, the jets returned to more dispersed patterns, and the rotation regained its usual stability. Yet the evidence remained recorded in every archive, every observation, every three-dimensional reconstruction. 3I Atlas revealed that physics possesses layers we have not yet explored, and its contact demonstrated that matter can operate in modes we had hitherto regarded as impossible. Humanity now faces a challenge greater than the interpretation of a message, understanding the implications of an object capable of reorganizing physical reality in ways we are only beginning to glimpse. And as the visitor continues its ascending trajectory into the dark expanse, one thing is clear: the contact has not ended. It has merely changed form, leaving behind a record that will transform our view of the cosmos for generations to come.